Welcome back, gears. Today's video may seem a little bit strange at first, but bear with me. I really enjoyed doing the class tier list video, and it's easily become one of my popular videos. So I wanted to do another one that focused on some of the cards, and that's why I will be ranking all the gold skill cards in Gears 5 in today's video. Here's my thought process with this. Gold skill cards have always been the hardest to collect and max out simply because they are gold in colour, making them the rarest and giving them the lowest drop chance. In my opinion, these gold cards are supposed to give you a huge power complex and do a lot for the class since it's the hardest and probably the last thing you will max out with some classes. Knowing that, these cards have surely got to be amazing. Well, not really. So here's where this video comes in to pit all gold skill cards from all classes against each other. Each gold card does something different, so it would be unfair to say damage cards are better than utility or crowd control cards. Instead, I'm going to look at how useful the card is, does it synergize well with the class's playstyle, how well it does this, and how useful that particular card is. Across all 19 classes, there are 30 gold skill cards, with most classes having 2 different cards. Like I said, not all of these do the same thing, but I will go over each card a little bit and give it my ranking from S to D. For me, S tier skill cards either do multiple things decently well, or it does one thing amazingly well without any need to force the card to work. Before we kick this video off though, I just want to let you guys know that I have been streaming on Twitch on Tuesdays, but I am looking at other days to stream as well. So head over there, give me a follow to see when I go live. I am currently mastering all maps for Horde, Horde Frenzy and Escape, and trying to bring as many viewers with me as I can on that journey. So the link to my Twitch will be in the description box of this video. With that out of the way, let's start out with the gold skill cards of the Blademaster. So, ambushes up first. This card can give you anything from 15 to 30 seconds of ultimate cooldown when killing enemies from the side or behind. For me, this is only a C tier skill card, as the card only equates to about 5 to 10% of your ultimate ability cooldown. The thing is, Electro Blade only has a 5-minute cooldown anyway, so some bleeding and melee damage will normally give an equal amount of cooldown or possibly more. I would like to see this card changed. Maybe you could give it less cooldown but have it apply to all kills from any source, melee, bleed or ballistic, and maybe include assists. It's a bit below average right now. You can use it, but you will just get a lot more passive cooldown playing normally. The Blademaster's second gold skill card is called Blade Dancer. This one deals extra melee damage when you get a melee or bleed kill for 15 seconds, and that bonus stacks up to 200%. For me, this is an S tier skill card, definitely one of the best. The extra damage is amazing and it synergizes really well with the Blademaster's playstyle. You do need 8 kills at rank 1 to get the 200% bonus, but only 4 when you max this card out. However, this card does not increase bleeding damage caused by melee though. If it did, it probably would have been massively overpowered and unfair to most other classes, but either way, it's an S tier card, and you can even forego using Brawler in place of this, or use both and be completely overpowered. The next class we have is the Demolitions, and the first card of this class is Confirmed Kill. This card gives you 10 to 25 seconds of ultimate cooldown when you get kills with your ultimate ability. For me, this one is only B tier. It offers very, very little cooldown overall. It's about 1.6 to 4% per kill, which is basically nothing. And like the Blademaster, some boom shot kills and bleeding damage will give more cooldown than what this card can offer. Granted, it does synergize well that using your ultimate gives you your ultimate back slightly faster. It would be good to possibly change this. Maybe boost the cooldown on this to at least 60 seconds at max rank. Alternatively, you could change the card altogether. One idea that I had was have the artillery strikes do more damage the more kills it gets within a single use. That way you have to tactically mark your weaker enemies and then maximize damage on the enemies that you target later on. It's an average card, but it could be better. The second gold skill card for the Demolitions is Bullet Boost. This works very much in the same way as Blademaster. You will deal increased ballistic damage, but on explosive and bleed kills for 15 seconds, stacking up to 200%. For me, though, this one sits all the way down in C tier, unfortunately. I really did want to like this card a lot more. It just doesn't synergize well on this class. You need explosive kills to increase your ballistic damage, so you do kind of need to force it a little bit. If you use the Lancer GL a lot, then fair enough, it does work quite well with that. But again, it needs to be forced a little bit. The damage buff is nice, maxing out at 200% in the same way that the Blademaster does. You need 8 kills at rank 1, but only 4 at max rank, and the stacks fall and rise independently of each other. I think it does need changing a little bit, in my opinion. If you made it so that ballistic kills increase ballistic damage, that would be a nice welcome change, but you would essentially have an alternative veteran class here as well. It could be better. I would love to use this card a lot more, but I do kind of need to force myself to use it. Next up is the Infiltrator with the Chain skill card. This one gives you 2 to 5 seconds of ultimate duration whenever you kill an enemy whilst using your ultimate ability. For me, this is our first A tier skill card. It does give a huge amount of extra duration, the best overall boost for any of these kinds of cards. It equates to about 13.3% or a third of extra ultimate duration, but that is partly due to the fact that Cloak is what it's called, has a slightly shorter duration anyway. It does work well though, especially if you pair it with something like Cloak batteries. You can get a hell of a lot of duration, staying cloaked for almost entire rounds. But I think it needs something extra adding to it just to bump it up into S tier. Again, another idea that I had was if you give the card increased execution or movement speed as well, that way it can entice you to stay cloaked for a little bit longer. Or another card could be introduced that would boost your passive damage. So the longer you stay cloaked, the more damage you do. Your passive already does this up to 10 times the amount, but basically introduce a card that takes this even further. Something like for every 2 seconds you are cloaked, deal 100% extra damage when finishing your ultimate with a ballistic shot. That way, yes, you could technically one-shot bosses with enough time in it, but you would have to spend a lot of time executing enemies for that build-up. Anyway, it's the only gold skill card for the Infiltrator, but it is a good one. Definitely A tier in my opinion. Onto the Marksman next, with Icy Precision. This gives 13 to 34% freezing damage on precision shots. For me though, it only sits in C tier. It is a great crowd control effect against bosses, as 1 or 2 precision hits is usually more than enough to finish off most drones and scions even on master difficulty. The damage buff you get for freezing a boss is nice though. It increases all yours and your teammates' damage. It is better in modes like Boss Rush where you can make use out of it every single wave as opposed to every 5 to 10 waves in Standard Horde. Something I think that could bump up is have that freezing damage stay as it is, but when enemies are frozen, have you deal, I don't know, slightly more damage to frozen enemies. Just add that extra little bit of synergy onto the card because I'm pretty sure when Fars used to be the Marksman, This card originally was do more damage to frozen enemies. It would be nice to see that added back into the card. I know that's not going to happen, but maybe for Gear 6, we'll see. On to the last damage class with the Nomad. And the first card here is Armored Shot. This gives 35 to 60% bleeding damage on ballistic hits. For me, this is easily an A tier skill card. The damage on this card is absolutely outstanding. It can be used with any ballistic weapon as well. Rifles, shotguns, pistols, and obviously snipers. You can even use it with the Lancer GL grenades because for some reason they count as ballistic hits. But it does have its limitations though. You are required to have at least 1 HP of stim to get the bleeding damage to activate. And the execution rules mutator is an immediate counter to this card, as even the bleeding damage can't finish enemies off. You do need to use another card or have another class generate stim for you to maximize your uptime on this card, but a possible change that would bump it into S tier easily is not requiring the stim for this card, but I guess that would also be slightly broken. In its current state, I would say it's borderline S. It's a very, very good card, and I'm happy with it being in A tier. Next up is Intimidation. This will fear any nearby enemies that you critically kill for 7 to 12 seconds. Oh, this card is bad. It can synergize well, but if you are using a sniping build, it can get difficult to then target those enemies that are feared. It's a good idea to target feared enemies with a Nomad because obviously your passive allows you to deal double damage to feared enemies, and that's what has always enticed me with this card. The problem is the radius on this card is only 5 meters. It means that you pretty much have to target enemies that are shoulder to shoulder. Otherwise, they're not going to be feared. And when you do fear some enemies, they're going to be quite far away, especially if you're sniping. And they're going to turn around and run even further in the opposite direction quite quickly, making it pretty difficult to get your next shot off. Couple of ideas I had to change this card would be maybe increase the radius to at least 10 meters. That would be a massive welcome change. And add something else to the Nomad that would slow enemies that are feared. Something similar to the Brawler's Glow and Slow card. For me, 2 welcome changes like that would definitely open up this card a lot more, but don't use this unless you are an absolute crack shot and can hit those enemies feared running around on the opposite side of the map. Next up, we have the Anchor, and the first card here is the Barrier Feedback skill card. This gives 2 to 3 seconds of extra ultimate duration on kill whenever you get a kill with your ultimate ability. For me, this sits very middle of the road, B tier. The extra duration is decent. It adds about 10 to 15% onto your ultimate, but you do kind of need some other cards to maximize the use out of this though. Bloody Shot and Bullet Chain, as well as the damage perks, are probably going to be needed to secure some kills so you can get that increase in duration. But one thing that I did think of was maybe keep the increased duration the same, but have it include eliminations, or severely lower the cooldown on the increased duration, but include kills of any teammates that shoot through your barrier. That would be a nice change because then you can definitely get a lot more use out of it and it becomes more of a team-wide ultimate. It's an average card, but you do need a lot of support to maximize the use out of it. The Anchor's second card is Bullet Chain. Precision kills increase precision damage for 15 seconds, stacking up to 200%. For me, this is an A tier skill card without a doubt. It's a really, really good damage card, similar to Blademaster and Bullet Boost, and it's fairly easy to stack as the Anchor as well, since you get perks for both damage and critical damage. What I feel keeps this in A and rather S tier is simply because the card does not include bleeding damage, unlike those other 2 cards that I mentioned, even though the Anchor is more than capable of this. So if the bleeding kills were included on this, I would easily bump this up to S tier alongside Blademaster. It's a very good card overall. It's definitely easier to use on Bullet Boost, but Blademaster does far outshine this one. Brawler is up next, and with this one first, we have All the Glory. This gives 5 to 30% area damage upon killing a burning enemy. This is only a C tier skill card, but I do really like this card. It's one of my favorites, and I put it into most of my builds. It's definitely better if you do a melee build as opposed to a long range build. But once again, execution rules is simply a good counter to this card, as burning enemies will not burn out with this mutator on. A good thing to do with this card is target enemies that don't have a down but not out state, just like Juvies, Rejects, Imagos, and Scions. That way, when they die, you'll get that explosive damage. That damage and explosive radius is a little bit weak. If you could boost this a little bit, especially for the long range build, I think it would do a lot more for the class. Not only that, it does require a couple of other cards to maximize the use out of this. If you go on a long range build, you need the Play with Fire card. Or if you are doing a melee build, Torch Tackle is essential just to set the enemies on fire in the first place. It needs a bit of love in my opinion. It's usable, but it's a bit below average, and it's got some immediate counters. The Brawler's next skill card is Soothing Warmth. This gives 150% to 275% forced health regeneration when within 2.5 meters of burning enemies. Sadly, guys, this is only D tier. The amount of forced health regeneration on this is nice, but I do expect a lot more out of a gold defensive card. For example, take the Blademaster's Thrill of the Hunt card. This is a purple rarity card that gives the same amount of forced health regeneration, but also includes damage resistance for a more common card. This card definitely needs some work. If you gave it damage resistance as well, something maybe like 40 to 50% since it's a gold card, that would do a hell of a lot for this one. Try to avoid using this one. It is definitely a bottom of the barrel card, but I would be amazed to find someone with a great build utilizing this card, especially for like master difficulty. Next up is the Gunner, and the first card here is Reflect Shredder. This gives 20 to 55% bleeding damage on any reflected damage using your ultimate ability. For me, this sits all the way up in A tier, easily. A very, very good card that will improve your already impressive ultimate ability. You don't have to do anything fancy either to utilize this card, just play as if you would normally play anyway. And even if this is the only card you equip on the Gunner, you're still going to commit a lot of damage to your team just because you have such a good ultimate. It's definitely above average, but again, it does have some immediate counters. Execution rules is one of them. The Gunner's second skill card, Serrated Edge. This gives 15 to 40% bleeding damage on hits with the Torque Bow. This sits just below in B tier. It's once again another great card that will enhance your starting weapon rate that little bit more, but does have certain counters. Execution rules, reduced bleeding, and explosive damage. These are all 3 immediate counters to this. And you do need some other cards to maximize the use out of this. Practice every day. Concussive explosives are good ways to maximize your damage potential when using this. It's an average card, but it definitely does a lot. One possible change I'd maybe like to see, because it's a gold skill card, give it an extra effect. Maybe increase the blast radius on the bolt. So if you've got enemies that are stuck close enough together, you can easily hit multiple at the same time. Next up is the Pilot with the Hammer skill card. This card is just great. It deals 30 to 80% extra damage with the drop shot and stuns enemies for 1.5 to 4 seconds whenever you hit them. This is S tier without a doubt. This is how you make a great weapon specific card. The damage buff on this alone almost doubles the damage of the drop shot at max rank, which in my opinion puts into high A tier alone. Add the stun on top of that and you get a fantastic S tier weapon specific card. With this you can easily stun lock enemies like Scions and bosses, and the damage buff will have you easily finishing off smaller enemies in just a single hit. I cannot fault this one. I do wish more weapon specific cards were just as good as this, but it's definitely one of the better ones. S tier every single time. The pilot's second card, though, is Silverback Salvo. This one adds 0.3 to 1.35 seconds of ultimate duration when you hit an enemy with the salvo that's equipped to your Silverback. For me, this only sits in B tier, though. It's a good card, and I do like the unique benefit that you get, but the increased duration is very, very low. It's actually less than 1% at rank 1, and it's about 3.5% at max rank. But it is per hit rather than per kill, so that does go in its favour. I think it definitely needs something else adding to it to push it into A or S tier. Maybe increased ammo capacity, increased damage. Just something small but effective would be a great addition to this one. It's very middle of the road, and you will probably use it a hell of a lot like I do, but it could be better. On to the last tank class of today, we have the Veteran and the Band of Brothers skill card. So this card, it generates 25 to 150 stim per second whilst you use your ultimate ability, and that does affect your entire team, so long as they're within the radius. It's only a C tier card. Generating stim is great for survivability, especially for those classes that can't. However, if you aren't already at full health, you will not generate this stim, and only a few classes can make use of the excessive amounts of stim this generates, such as the Infiltrator or any of those with the increased stim capacity card. One thing I would like to see that would definitely just bump it up if the card healed you to full as well and then gave you the stim, or maybe just added that tiny amount of damage resistance. I would definitely rank it higher, probably A tier. Moving on to the support classes next, we have the Combat Medic and the Intervention skill card. So this card revives teammates within 10 to 20 meters of any enemy you kill, which is a B tier card in my eyes. It's a great card. It gives the Combat Medic another way of reviving teammates from further away. You can proc this card on yourself by killing an enemy as you go down, or having shot grenades equipped when you're down and then just activating it when something gets close, as one of the comments on my Horde class guide mentioned. My problem with this card is it can be hard to activate, especially on harder difficulties. The Combat Medic's one of the weaker classes in the game, but you can get up to 140% extra Lancer damage, but even then, getting a kill when you need this to work can be a bit difficult sometimes. Our next card is the Get Up skill card. This ultimate gives 30 to 80% stim to you and affected teammates. For me, it's only in C tier. The stim generation is nice, great, but you can actually generate more stim with just 3 headshots with the helpful headshots card equipped, and that will affect all nearby teammates. Because how this card works is it will only give that stim to teammates you revive. So even if your team revive wave passes over 3 of your teammates, they do not get that extra stim. So that could be a possible change, that even if they are revived or not, they get the stim anyway. It needs something extra, especially if you have teammates that keep getting caught out in the open. The Combat Medic's Overdoing It card gives forced health regeneration and damage resistance, but I feel like you need both that and this card to really maximize them both. If they were combined into one card, it would be amazing, definitely like A tier, but for now, sadly, it's 2 cards and it sits down in C tier at the moment. Jack is up next with the Backstab skill card, which gives 10 to 25 increased ultimate duration whenever you kill an enemy that you hijack with your ultimate. This is a great card and it's easy to get kills with Jack's ultimate ability, especially when you pair it with some of the other cards that Jack has. The increased duration does start off fairly low, but it does get substantially better as you level the card up. Some enemies you hijack, though, you're not going to get any benefit with this card. For example, Bastions. You can't kill an enemy while playing as a Bastion, or if you can, it's because you've blown up already, so you don't get any use out of it. It's a good card, but I can't think of any way to improve it, but just make sure you are using it on the correct enemies. Next up is Rampage. This has you deal 20 to 70% bleeding damage with any enemy you use your ultimate on. Again, this is another A tier skill card. It makes getting kills with Hijack a hell of a lot easier, and you can decimate bosses and entire waves as Jack if you take over the right enemy. Like I said, some enemies with this are just ridiculous. The Mulcher Scion, Elite Drones, Boomshot Scions, Ferons. Just take one of those really, really powerful enemies and you will deal a stupid amount of bleeding damage. It's a fantastic card. Both of Jack's gold skill cards are good. Pairing them is even better, and they both definitely deserve A tier in my opinion. Moving on to the mechanic next, we have the Healing Repair skill card. So Healing Repair will give you stim whenever you repair fortifications and provides about 2 to 3.2% of stim. For me, this is an S tier skill card. The synergy on this card for this class is amazing. You do not have to change your playstyle one tiny bit. Just be the engineer and it will make you a lot tankier. The problem is you can't hold that much stim as the mechanic, but it basically gives you stim on command whenever you want it. If you take a sniper bullet to the face, just go and repair a barrier for a few seconds and you'll have all that stim back instantly. Just play as the engineer, like I said, and you will stay alive easily by just doing exactly what you need to. Shredder rounds is up next. So this one is that the turret ultimate will cause bleeding damage for 5 to 30% of your damage dealt. For me, this only sits in B tier. It is an amazing damage card that gives your ultimate ability a huge damage boost, capable of killing bigger enemies and some bosses with ease. But you do need to give something up in your kit to fit this in and find the right time to use it. You don't really have anything else as the mechanic to support this one, other than, I think it's called Overload and the Fortification Damage perk. So I do think you need some other cards added to the mechanic to really enhance how good this one is, because you are quite immobile and something like a drop shot or boom shot sign can take you out. Something that would increase the duration of the turret, maybe give you damage resistance while using it, make it possible to taunt enemies that are shot by the turret. I think it needs something else just to maximize the use out of this, or just add them as completely separate cards. On its own, it's an average card, and it definitely needs a lot more to be bumped up into A or S, but you will probably get good use out of it. Probably more in Escape, but B tier is where I'm happy to put it for now. Moving on to the Robotics Expert next, we have Bloody DR1. So, very similar to Shredder Rounds that we just covered. This ultimate causes bleeding for 20 to 120% of damage dealt. For me, though, it sits in C tier, even with that amazing amount of damage. So the DR1 could obviously deal up to an extra 120% bleeding damage with any shots that it makes. But what lets this card down for me is the poor AI. I tend to find that the DR1 will either shred through multiple enemies or stand around not doing anything. I typically get the second one. Yes, you can control the DR1 a little bit by marking an enemy that you want it to shoot, but there's plenty of things that can stop the DR1 in its tracks. See it, drop shot scions and other bosses are able to one-shot it. Shock and freeze mutators can stop this thing from doing anything altogether. Execution rules is obviously another hindrance, and the bleeding modifier card that has you deal basically no bleeding damage is also another pain in the backside when using this card. It can be powerful, but it's the AI that bugs me with this one. If they fixed the AI and it was possible for this thing to take, at least a little bit of cover and not just stand there, I would probably bump it up a bit, but C tier is where it sits for me. Moving on to the Tactician, the last support class. First card we have here is the Resupply Healing module. So this gives your Resupply Ultimate 20 to 63% damage reduction and 50 to 225% forced health regeneration, so long as you are stood in the resupply radius. For me, this is an S tier card. I use this card in pretty much every Tactician build I do. The resupply is already a very good ultimate, and this card just takes it to another level effortlessly. 63% damage resistance is one of the highest damage resistance cards in Gears 5, and it does affect your entire team so long as they stay within the radius. And if you pair it with some other card like resupply duration, you can have this go in for about 30 seconds as well. And the Tactician gets their ultimate back stupidly fast. Free ammo, free explosives, a stupid amount of damage resistance, and a boatload of forced health regeneration. This is S tier every single time. Do not skip on this one. Up next is Cooperation though. This one will have your marked enemies take 5 to 30% extra damage from teammates. This one sits up in A tier. It's a very, very good support card for the Tactician, buffing your entire team's damage. But you do need at least one other card to maximize this card's potential. Situational Awareness, Eagle Eyes, or Interrogation are all good cards to make use of this. And you're most likely going to see this paired as a duo, one person playing the Demolitions with the Spotter support card, so that the Tactician can mark as many enemies as possible, and then the Demo just drops Artillery Strike on all those enemies that he has marked. If the damage buff counted for the Tactician as well, or you could mark additional enemies as a passive, much like the Demo, it would definitely be better off. It does have that downside right now, as if you are playing a solo game, this card does not do anything for you. Moving on to the promotional classes next, we have the Architect up first. Their gold skill card is called Regenerative Field. You will generate 2 to 12 stim every second after taking no damage for just over 4 seconds. For me, this sits up in B tier. It's a good survivability card for the Architect, and you can hold even more stim if you pair this with the stim capacity card. The stim generation as well is pretty much continuous so long as you are playing safe, but it is pretty much the only redeeming thing about the Architect, unfortunately. If this class also got some additional survivability cards, I don't know, something like some damage resistance whilst you have stim, it wouldn't be a bad addition for this class. It's very middle of the road right now, B tier. Up next is the Protector, and this class has the exact same skill card as the Architect. Regenerative Field, you generate 2 to 12 stim every second after taking no damage for 4 seconds. Since it's the same card, you'd expect me to put it also in B tier. Not this time. This one only sits in C tier personally, and that is for 2 reasons. You do not have an extra stim capacity card on the Protector, so you can only hold a little bit of stim as this class. And the Protector is melee based, so you're probably going to find it hard to keep hold of any stim you generate whilst trying to get in close to get those melee hits. If the class had some more defensive qualities like the Architect, then it would definitely be more useful, but C tier is where I'm going to leave this one. Moving on to the Slugger next, we have the Impact Receiver skill card. This one will stun drones for 1 to 3 seconds whenever you hit them with an active reloaded shotgun shell. For me, this sits all the way down in D tier, unfortunately. The stun on this card is nice, don't get me wrong, but it does have its downsides. It only affects drone type enemies, and only for a maximum of 3 seconds, and only if you hit them with active shotgun shells. For me, I'm personally torn between this and the Tough Skin skill card, but I will bounce between the two of them, so I do occasionally get use out of this, or I pretty much always forget that I have this card equipped. Maybe a nice change that could bump it up a little bit would be that if you do stun an enemy, have the same card deal more damage to stunned enemies. But for now, it's one of the weakest cards in the game. All the promotional classes, in my opinion, need some love, but I'm leaving this in D tier. It's up to you if you want to use it or not. You may occasionally get use out of it, but I prefer taking the Tough Skin skill card every now and again anyway. Moving on to the very last class in the game, it's the Striker. The card they have is called GSD. This one will cause enemies to explode for 50 to 85% of damage dealt when you kill them with melee damage. Again, it's only D tier though, unfortunately. It's a nice damage buff to your melee when it works, and it does help that the class is also melee based. But it doesn't work on bleed or ballistic kills, unfortunately. And it can be a bit difficult to get melee kills as a striker, since you are kind of weak with only 2 defensive cards. Would be nice to see bleeding enemies exploding as well from this card, just to give it a little bit of love, since bleeding damage can only be applied through melee with a breaker mace anyway. It's D tier, it's very weak, you will occasionally get use out of it since you are limited with your card options on this class, but for me it definitely needs some love. So that is my personal judgment for all gold skill cards from all classes in Gears 5. If you want to make your own tier list, I'm going to leave a link to this in the description box of this video, or just leave me a comment below telling me what you would do differently. I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well. And if this video is popular enough, I could do something similar for the other colours of skill cards as well. But before we finish off, I just want to remind you that I am streaming on Twitch if you want to watch me live and join in for some Horde and Escape. So head over there and give us a follow to see when I am live. But that will be the end for this video. I tried some new things out with this one, and if you made it this far, then thank you very much for watching. As always, have an awesome day, Gears, and I will see you in the next one.